The council chamber was vast, a space designed to accommodate the largest and most powerful species in the galaxy. And on this day it felt even more enormous because of the tension that hung in the air like a physical thing. David sat at the human delegation table and watched the Krell Empire representative stand to speak, his massive crystalline form reflecting the soft blue light of the chamber walls. His words were harsh and direct without any kindness in them at all. "The dragon family has awakened," the Krell said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "This is not a situation for infant species. Humanity should remove itself from all affected regions and cease all diplomatic interference." The Luminex Federation representative agreed. A beings made of pure energy that moved across the floor like flowing water, speaking in tones that made David's translator struggle to keep up. Humans lack the biological capacity to survive in regions where dragon fire is likely to spread. Your species would be obliterated in moments. David felt his hands grip the edge of the table. But he did not stand. He did not argue. He waited to hear what the Sarek Collective would say. Though he already knew their position before they even spoke, the elderly Sarek stood slowly, his multiple limbs arranging themselves with perfect precision. "We have protected human interests in this council for 3 cycles. But even we cannot defend a species that is so obviously out of its depth. The dragons are an apex species, first among the ancient ones. To place humans in their path is to sign death warrants for innocent people." David's ambassador, a woman named Lisa, who had worked with the humans for many years and understood their ways better than most aliens, looked at David with sadness in her eyes. She knew what was coming. They both did. The council vote was unanimous. Every single representative, even the few who had shown sympathy to human interests, raised their limbs or appendages or extensions in agreement. Humanity was to evacuate all settlements from the disputed regions within 72 hours. All human vessels were to withdraw to safe zones beyond the outer markers. And most importantly, David himself was ordered to leave the council and return to human space on the very next transport as the council began to dissolve and members started to move toward the exits. David remained seated, his mind working through the problem like it was a puzzle that could be solved with enough time and thought. But time was exactly what he did not have. Lisa approached his table and sat down across from him. She reached out her hand and touched his arm, a gesture that was a violation of protocol, but which she made anyway. "You cannot stay," she said quietly. "The council will demand your arrest if they discover you have disobeyed their orders." "I know," David said, his voice steady and calm. "I know what they will do. And I know what I have to do anyway." Lisa withdrew her hand and her expression changed. She understood then that David had already made his decision, that all the votes and all the orders in the galaxy would not change the path he had chosen. "Tell me what you need," she said. And in those 5 words she made herself complicit in whatever came next. David explained it all in whispers. The intelligence that humans had gathered about the dragon clutch, the eggs that had been separated from their family during the accident that first woke the dragons, the location in the collapsing star system where the eggs had been secured in an ancient dragon vault, and most importantly, the fact that every other species had decided it was too dangerous to attempt to rescue. "If those eggs are not returned to the dragon family," David said, "then you will have a grieving species that is capable of destroying entire solar systems. A species that will have learned that the council does not care about their young. A species that will decide that mercy and negotiation are the languages of the weak." Lisa listened and understood what David was truly saying. He was not talking about dragon eggs. He was talking about the future of peace in the galaxy. He was talking about preventing a war that would cost trillions of lives. "I will help you," Lisa said. "I will alter the evacuation records so that it appears you left with the other humans. I will give you access to what I can. But David, You must understand that if this fails, if you are caught, humanity will suffer for it. If I do nothing, David replied, humanity will also suffer, just in a different way. We will be remembered as the species that abandoned innocent lives because it was convenient. Because it was safe, I cannot accept that ending. The council chamber was emptying now. The great representatives of the galaxy, returning to their ships and their stations and their comfortable positions of power, none of them knowing that one human was about to challenge everything they believed about hierarchy and capability and what was possible. David stood from his table and walked toward the exit. He moved slowly and without urgency, just another tired diplomat leaving another pointless meeting. But inside his mind was moving at incredible speed, running through the resources he would need, the people he would have to trust. The timeline that had already begun to count down toward the moment when everything would change. Outside the council chamber, in the docking bay, where the human transport vessel waited to carry the delegation home, David made his way to the communications array. He needed to reach Karen. She had been a soldier once, and Robert, who had always been able to make machines do things they were not supposed to do. He sent the message in code, a simple phrase about repairs needed on the old settlement equipment. A phrase that only they would understand meant something else entirely. A message that meant, stay behind, help me. We are going to save a family that the galaxy does not think deserves saving. Within the hour, he had his answer from both of them. 2 words each, I am here. And in those 3 words, everything was decided. The evacuation of the human delegation proceeded as planned. The human ships left the council station and began their journey back to human space. But not all of the humans left. 3 of them remained hidden in the station's lower levels. 3 humans who were about to become the most important actors in a drama that would reshape the entire galactic order. David knew the costs of what they were about to do. But he also knew something that the council did not. He knew that humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons or speed or technology. It was in the willingness to see value in others, to risk everything for people they had never met, to believe that compassion was worth more than security. That belief was about to change the galaxy forever. Karen had always known that following orders was not her strongest quality, even when she was still in the military. Her commanding officers had praised her for her ability to think beyond the rules, to see problems in ways that the standard training could never teach. But they had also warned her that this thinking would one day get her into serious trouble. She was waiting in the maintenance corridor when David found her, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the metal walls, and when she saw him approach, she simply nodded. No questions asked, no demands for explanations. Just a soldier ready for a mission that would either end in glory or in death. We need Robert, David said. And Karen led him through passages that few people even knew existed. Passages that the human delegation had discovered during their first visits to the council station. Routes that the security systems had forgotten to monitor. Robert was in the equipment storage area, surrounded by the kind of technology that made him happiest. Machines and devices and systems that could be modified and adapted and transformed into something entirely new. He was already packing supplies when they arrived. His small pack filled with tools and components and devices that David could not even identify. I took the liberty of beginning some preparations, Robert said, his hands moving quickly as he sealed the pack. I may have also taken some environmental shielding systems that might prove useful if we are heading where I think we are heading. The collapsing star system, David confirmed. And Robert grinned with the expression of a man who had just received the confirmation that his impossible dreams might actually become reality. The 3 of them made their way to the human cargo docks, where Elisa had arranged access to a small transport vessel. The kind of ship that was used for routine supply runs and equipment transfers. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would draw attention. Just another small human vessel among hundreds of others that came and went through the council station every single day as they boarded the ship. David felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He was committing an act of defiance against the entire Galactic Council. He was ordering the retrieval of alien property without permission. He was placing 2 innocent people in danger based on his belief that saving lives was more important than following laws. But when he looked at Karen and Robert, he saw the same determination in their faces that he felt in his own heart. They had chosen this path, and they would walk it all the way to its end. The ship departed the station without incident. Lisa's access codes and falsified records ensuring that no alarm was raised, and as soon as they entered open space, David began the journey toward the coordinates that intelligence had provided. The location where the dragon eggs were being held. Robert took control of the ship's systems and began to modify them for the conditions they would face. The radiation of the collapsing star system would destroy most ships. The gravitational forces would tear apart anything not properly shielded. The temperature variations would melt standard hull materials. But with modifications and adaptations, and Robert's brilliant understanding of how to push technology beyond its designed limits, there might be a chance Karen moved through the ship checking weapons and medical supplies. Not because they expected to need weapons, but because a soldier without her tools felt unprepared. And preparation was the only advantage they possessed against the impossible task ahead of them as they accelerated toward the outer reaches of known space. David took time to record his thoughts, the message that would explain everything if they did not return. The explanation of why he had chosen to defy the council. The words that would preserve his choices for history, even if history forgot his name. I am making this recording because if we do not survive what comes next, I wanted to be understood that we chose this path with clear eyes, David said into the recording device, his voice steady despite the fear that existed in the corner of his mind. We are not heroes. We are simply humans who believed that some lives were worth saving, and that compassion was worth the risk of death. As the days passed and the ship moved deeper into space, the signs of the Dragon family's desperation became increasingly visible. Massive vessels that bore the marks of their ancient ships, weapons testing that had left asteroids shattered and dying, patterns of search behavior that revealed a family in pain, searching endlessly for something precious that they had lost. David watched the data streams and understood what it meant. The dragons were becoming desperate, and desperate species made dangerous choices. They would do things that peaceful species would never consider. They would wage wars and destroy colonies and remake the galaxy in the image of their anger. If their eggs were not returned soon, Karen stood beside him and watched the same data with a soldier's understanding. We are racing against time, she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. We are, David agreed. And we are also racing against the possibility that the dragons themselves will destroy the eggs, rather than let them fall into what they perceive as enemy hands. Robert called them both to the engine room, where he had completed the modifications to the ship's shielding systems. We will have maybe 30 minutes inside the system before the ship begins to fail, he said. His voice carried no fear, only the practical assessment of a man who had done the calculations and accepted the results. We need to be in and out before that timer reaches 0. David nodded. They all understood the terms, they all accepted the risk. There was nothing left to do but move forward toward the confrontation that awaited them. The journey continued through space. The great black emptiness filled with the radiation of dying stars and the ghost echoes of ancient civilizations. And 3 humans drove deeper into danger because they believed that hope was stronger than fear, and compassion was worth the cost of their own lives. The gravitational forces of the collapsing star system hit the ship like a physical blow, even with Robert's modifications. The vessel groaned and shuddered as it pushed deeper into a space where reality itself was becoming distorted and hostile. David gripped the command chair as alarms sounded around him. The radiation detectors screaming their warnings in pitch patterns that meant certain death for any unprotected organism. But the three humans were inside a ship with shields that were holding, barely, as the modifications continued to route power and reroute systems in ways that the original designers had never imagined. 30 minutes, Robert called from the engine station, his hands moving across the controls with practiced precision. That is all we have. Maybe less if the gravitational stress increases. Karen was already in her suit, the protective equipment that would allow her to survive outside the ship if necessary. She checked every seal and every connection. She moved like a person who understood that her life depended on the quality of her preparation. The vault appeared on the sensors, like a ghost. An ancient structure that had survived longer than entire civilizations. Larger than anything that should have been possible to hide, but which was hidden nonetheless. Buried deep within the debris fields and the distorted space near the heart of the dying star, David guided the ship closer, navigating through gravitational shears that tried to tear the vessel apart, and past radiation streams that would have killed them instantly without the shields. The ancient vault drew closer until finally they could see it clearly through the forward viewport. A massive structure that sang with the hum of power sources that had been running continuously for thousands of years. "I am not registering any active defense systems," Robert reported. His voice carried a note of skepticism. "The vault appears to be dormant, or the defenses are so advanced that we cannot detect them," Karen replied. And David understood that she was probably right. A vault designed to protect eggs precious enough to be worth dying for would not announce its presence to intruders. The ship moved into docking position, and Karen began to prepare the equipment for the vault breach. They had no way to crack the vault manually. The doors were sealed with technology that was older than human civilization, but they had something better. They had David and his translator systems, and his understanding that sometimes the best way to break through a barrier was not to break it at all, but to communicate with it. Karen sealed her suit and made her way to the airlock, the pressure equalization hissing as the door opened, and she stepped out into the harsh radiation of the star system, connected only to David and Robert by a thin communication line and the tether that would keep her from drifting into the wide-ray gravitational chaos. She moved toward the vault entrance, her suit's lights cutting through the darkness, and when she reached the door, she activated the explosive charges that were designed to breach ancient locks. But before she could trigger them, David spoke directly into her com. "Wait," he said. "Try the communication protocol first." Karen paused, her hand hovering over the detonator, and she activated the universal communication beacon that all ships carried. It sent out a signal in every known language and format, a message that meant nothing more than "Here. We are here. We want to talk." For a long moment nothing happened, and then the vault door began to glow, patterns of light dancing across its surface in sequences that did not correspond to any known language. And David understood that he was being tested. He moved to the communication station and began to send his own signals. Not words, but concepts, images of care and protection and desperate desire to preserve something precious. He sent the image of eggs and families and the bonds that tied all living things together regardless of species or origin. The vault door continued to pulse with light, and David continued to send his thoughts and feelings through the communication channel. He was not speaking to a lock anymore. He was speaking to a guardian, an ancient intelligence that had been placed here to protect something irreplaceable. And he was trying to convince it that he and his companions were not thieves or enemies, but saviors. Karen waited outside in the radiation and the chaos, trusting David to find the words that would open the door, and Robert waited in the ship, his hands ready to push the engines to their absolute limit if they needed to escape in an instant. Finally, the vault door swung open, revealing a chamber beyond that hummed with power and purpose. A space that had been designed to preserve the eggs in conditions of absolute perfection. And there they were, 17 dragon eggs resting on platforms of pure energy, each one large enough to require 3 humans to carry. Each one precious beyond measure. Karen moved into the chamber and David guided her from the ship, describing the conditions that needed to be maintained. The temperature, the radiation shielding, the way each egg needed to be handled with absolute care and respect. Robert began powering up the containment vessels that they had prepared. Chambers designed to mimic the conditions of the vault as closely as possible. As Karen carefully began to move the eggs to the carrying cases, the ancient system seemed to acknowledge her actions. Lights guiding her movements, showing her how to handle each egg properly. It was as though the vault itself was helping her to complete the rescue. David continued his dialogue with the ancient guardian, explaining that the eggs would be returned to their family, that no harm would come to them, that humans were choosing to accept risk and possible death to ensure the safety of another species' young. And with each reassurance, the vault seemed to relax, the defenses stood down. The ancient protocols of protection were satisfied by the genuinely protective intentions of the 3 humans 23 minutes into their 30-minute window. Karen returned to the ship with the final egg. All 17 had been successfully transferred to the containment vessels, and Robert immediately began the sequence to break orbit and escape the gravitational collapse that was accelerating toward their position. The ship pulled away from the vault as the ancient structure began to sink deeper into the dying star, slowly disappearing into the radiation and chaos. And David watched it go with the knowledge that he had just changed the course of galactic history. "We are leaving," Robert called, and the ship pushed away from the system with every ounce of power that Robert's modifications could provide. Chasing the safe zones and the open space beyond behind them, the dragon eggs were safe, and ahead of them lay consequences that would reshape the entire galaxy. The sensors began to register multiple vessels approaching from opposite directions at nearly the same moment, and Robert's voice came through the com with the detached precision of a man describing the inevitable. "The Council enforcement fleet is closing from the Chord side," he said, "and the Dragon military formation is coming from the rimward approach. They are going to intercept us at almost the same time." David felt his heart rate accelerate. This was the moment he had known would come. The moment when the decision he had made in the council chamber would finally demand its full price. The moment when everything either worked or everything collapsed. Karen was still in the environmental suit. She moved to the weapon station not because they had any intention of fighting, but because she understood that she needed to look prepared, even if preparation was merely an illusion. The Council's enforcement ships carried enough firepower to vaporize them in seconds. The Dragon military vessels carried enough destructive power to obliterate entire solar systems. "Open all communication channels," David commanded. "I want a broadcast on every frequency that either species monitors." Robert worked the communications array, and within moments, David's voice was being transmitted to every ship approaching their position, to the council stations scattered across the galaxy, to every listening post and monitoring station that was tuned to the traffic of open space. "This is David Chun, representative of the human delegation to the Galactic Council," he began, his voice steady and clear despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm his thoughts. "I am transmitting to you information about the current situation and the location of the Dragon clutch that was lost in the recent catastrophic event." He sent the data packets that detailed everything: the Council's decision to abandon the eggs, the human determination to mount a rescue, the location of the vault, and the details of how the rescue had been completed without loss of life or damage to the precious cargo. "The Dragon eggs are now aboard my vessel," David continued. "They are safe and unharmed. They are being transported at this moment to the dragon family for immediate return to their custody. The response came almost immediately. A dragon military formation that suddenly altered course, their weapons arrays powering down. And on the communications channels, David heard a sound like music and thunder combined. The voice of the dragon speaking in a frequency that made the ship's systems vibrate. "Human," the dragon voice said. And David understood that he was speaking to the eldest of the family, the matriarch of the entire species. "Your ship carries our young, our eggs precious beyond all measure. Explain your actions or we will assume deception and respond with appropriate force." David did not hesitate. He spoke directly and truthfully, describing the council meeting and the decision to evacuate, detailing the reasons why other species had concluded that rescue was impossible, explaining his own decision to defy those orders and his conviction that some lives were worth saving regardless of the risk. "The council told you that rescue was too dangerous," David said, "but humans decided that allowing your young to perish was more dangerous still. Not to our own safety, but to the security of the entire galaxy, because we understood what despair would do to a species that had lost everything." Karen watched the sensor readings as the dragon formation surrounded them, not in an aggressive posture, but in a protective stance, as though the dragons themselves were shielding the human vessel from external threats. Meanwhile, the Council enforcement fleet was decelerating as well. The commanders of those ships suddenly aware that they were approaching a situation far more complex than they had anticipated. Aware that 3 humans had accomplished what an entire galactic government had deemed impossible. "The eggs are unharmed," the dragon matriarch said. And it was not a question. It was a statement being made to ensure absolute clarity. "Completely unharmed," David replied. "They have been maintained in perfect conditions since the moment we retrieved them from the vault system. Every environmental parameter has been calibrated for dragon eggs. Robert Chun, our engineer, personally ensured that the containment systems were designed with optimal specifications for their preservation." Robert acknowledged the mention of his name with a slight nod. Though the dragons would have no way to know the gesture, his hands continued their work, maintaining the containment systems and ensuring that every reading remained perfect. The dragon formation began to move toward the human vessel, and David had a moment of pure terror as he wondered if they had misjudged the dragon's response. If the matriarch had determined that the best way to reclaim the eggs was to simply vaporize the human ship and retrieve them from the debris. But instead, the dragons moved into a protective formation around them, creating a shield against the approaching council enforcement vessels. "Your species has shown us something unexpected," the dragon matriarch said, her voice filling the communications channels with the weight of judgment. "You have shown us that younger species are capable of understanding sacrifice, capable of risking everything for lives that are not even their own. This is a trait that the Council itself has forgotten, if they ever possessed it at all." The dragon military formation turned toward the Council enforcement fleet, and David understood that something fundamental was about to shift in the balance of galactic power. "The Galactic Council will explain why they abandoned our young," the dragon matriarch commanded, her voice carrying a tone that was neither question nor request, but absolute demand. "And the Council will explain why they did not attempt the rescue that this single human was able to accomplish." The Council enforcement fleet came to a stop, maintaining distance but not approaching, and David realized that the balance of power had shifted completely. The dragons were no longer asking for permission or cooperation. They were demanding accountability from the very organization that had claimed to represent. Galactic governance messages began to flood in from across the galaxy. Other species leaders were speaking about what had happened, about the actions of 3 humans and 1 dragon family, about what it meant for the future of the galactic order. David focused on what mattered most in that moment: the safe passage of the dragon eggs to their family. He ignored the politics and the power plays and the monumental shift in galactic dynamics. He maintained his concentration on the mission that had started in the council chamber. Weeks ago, the Dragon Matriarch approached the human vessel with a personal guard of warriors and requested that David himself come to her ship to facilitate the final transfer of the eggs. To ensure that he understood the magnitude of what humanity had accomplished, David agreed without hesitation. And as he prepared to leave the ship, Karen clasped his shoulder, a gesture that meant everything the words could not express. And Robert simply said, "Return safely," which was an order more than a request. 3 cycles after the return of the dragon eggs, the Galactic Council reconvened to discuss what would come next. And this time, the composition of the chamber had changed, not in membership, but in atmosphere. The same representatives who had voted to abandon the eggs were now forced to acknowledge that a younger species had accomplished what their collective wisdom had deemed impossible. David sat at the human delegation table, but now there were other humans present as well. Lisa was there representing human diplomatic interests, and the chamber no longer felt like a place where humans were tolerated as a necessary nuisance. Now it felt like a place where humans had earned the right to speak and be heard. The Dragon Matriarch herself was present, her presence alone commanding respect and attention. And when she rose to speak, the entire chamber fell into silence. Even the normally confident Krell representatives seemed to shrink back from her gaze. "The Galactic Council," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom and authority, has demonstrated through its actions that it values convenience over compassion, safety over sacrifice, and calculation over courage. Your organization has become a tool for maintaining the status quo rather than a forum for creating a better future. The Krell representative attempted to respond, but the Dragon Matriarch silenced him with a gesture. "However," she continued, "your failure has been highlighted by the success of a different approach. 3 humans and 1 rescued clutch have shown the galaxy that the strength to be celebrated is not the strength of weapons or numbers, but the strength of genuine care for life, regardless of cost." The council chamber remained silent as the matriarch announced that the dragon family would be establishing a new alliance with humanity, a partnership that would extend dragon protection over human interests across the galaxy, but more importantly, an alliance based on mutual respect and the recognition that younger species could achieve what older, more powerful ones had given up on. David listened as the political landscape shifted around him. Lisa leaned over and whispered a word that summed up everything that was happening. "History," she said. And David understood that this moment would be remembered as the turning point when humanity moved from being a marginal species to being one of genuine importance in galactic affairs. In the weeks that followed, other species began to recalibrate their relationships with humans. The Luminex Federation offered formal recognition as partners. The Zarig Collective apologized for having underestimated human capacity for courage. And even the Krell Empire, though reluctantly, accepted humanity's new status in the galactic community. David, Karen, and Robert were offered positions of significant power, opportunities to lead councils and direct military operations and manage the resources of entire planets. But all 3 of them refused. They asked instead to be allowed to establish something new, something different. An organization dedicated to rescue operations and humanitarian missions across the galaxy. David called it the Bridges Project, a network of humans and willing aliens who would work together to prevent the kinds of situations that the Galactic Council had abandoned. Places where lives were at risk and hope had faded. Places where a rescue was possible if someone simply dared to attempt it. Karen became the director of operations, her military expertise perfectly suited to planning dangerous missions and ensuring that every rescue operation was executed with precision and care. Robert continued his work as an engineer, But now he was designing ships and systems specifically for rescue and humanitarian work, creating technologies that could reach places no one else could access. David himself became the face of the Bridges project, traveling throughout the galaxy to speak about what had happened, explaining to younger species that they too possessed the strength to accomplish great things, reminding older species that wisdom without compassion was merely calculation, and inspiring individuals across every species to believe that one person could change the fate of millions on a neutral world far from the political centers of galactic power. David stood in a garden that had been created specifically as a symbol of the new alliance between dragons and humans. Young dragons played under artificial skies that mimicked Earth's sun, and human children ran alongside them, learning to appreciate the beings that legend had taught them to fear. An elderly dragon approached David as he watched the children play. It was the matriarch herself, and she moved with the grace of someone who had lived through the transformation of her entire civilization. "You have given my species something precious," the matriarch said. "Not merely our eggs, but the understanding that goodness exists among the younger races. That compassion is not weakness, but the truest form of strength." David bowed respectfully. "You have given humanity something equally precious," he replied. "You have shown the galaxy that we are worthy of respect, not because we are powerful, but because we are willing to sacrifice everything for others." The matriarch placed a claw gently on David's shoulder, a gesture that transcended species and language. And together, they watched the children play, dragons and humans together in a future that neither species would have imagined possible in the moment. When the council had voted to turn away back on the human worlds, the story of David and Karen and Robert became the foundation of a new cultural narrative. Humans stopped seeing themselves as a species that had to fight for acceptance, and instead began to see themselves as a species that had already proven its value through the willingness to dare in universities and schools. The title of the story they told was always the same. Everyone stepped back from the dragon family, except one human who dared step forward. And that single act of courage changed everything, changed the galaxy, changed the future, changed what it meant to be human in a universe that suddenly knew that compassion was the greatest strength that any species could possess. The dragon eggs that had been saved grew into magnificent creatures, dragons that carried within them the memory of their rescue, dragons that looked at humans with gratitude instead of contempt. And that transformation of understanding rippled outward through time, changing not just the present, but rewriting the entire history of the future. And in the gardens where dragons and humans played together, the peace that had seemed impossible became inevitable, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple decision of one person to believe that some lives were worth saving, and that the strength to save them was worth the risk of everything.